How do you find the right flour for the pizza of your dreams? Well, it comes down to knowing what good flour is, what makes a good dough, from spring wheat to winter wheat to ancient grains. Today, our guest is Nicky Giusto of Central Milling. When it comes down to Central Milling, they work hand in hand with farmers and the operator to make sure that they help you source a product that's going to make the pizza or the bread that you have in your mind. This is an amazing episode, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And remember to always ask, what's good dough? And I wanted to start things off with organic flour. I've been following Central Milling for four and a half years now. I got my first bag of Tony Gimignani flour, and I think that was my first time working with you all. There's a picture of me in front of my old house, just super excited to receive this in the mail.
Ah, cool.
And as I've followed Central Milling, I've seen more of a push for organic flour. For example, when you go on your website, it's the first thing you see. I've seen that, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the non-organic stuff has sort of gone away. And so maybe talk to me about like where your mind is at with organic flour and why the big push.
Central Milling, we've always been organic first, like from the beginning, and actually before the word organic really existed. My family and our partner's family, the Perry family, have been involved in farming and using grains from the cleanest, most reputable sources that they could find at the time. And when chemicals were becoming more and more, I don't want to say pushed onto farmers, but sold to farmers as an advantage to increase crop yield and protein consistency and things like that. A divide in the farming community started to begin. People that wanted to use this stuff and the people that didn't want to use this stuff on their land. So
what's the divide right now, would you say, in a percentage wise?
Well, that's a really complicated question because of the economics or agronomics around farming is so, I don't know what the right word is, but it's difficult because farming is really expensive to do, but you're farming a commodity and you're at the whim of the market. So you have a lot of what we call conventional farmers that are just looking to maximize their crop yield and protein consistency to make their farms work. And then you have the people that are more on the philosophical side of things that want to take care, nurture their land, and put nutrients back in the soil and focus on that original cycle of life. And it's organic is, honestly, I don't know the percentage. Something probably I should know, but I don't know what the organic farming base is because a lot of the organic farmers out there do not report what they do. So there are statistics on the USDA's website, and it's a very, very low percentage. It's single digits, low single digits at that of what America is growing for organic wheat compared to conventional farming. But the movement is very passionate, on the organic side. So those that are doing it because they're choosing to do it. It's not necessarily a money thing, even though it does trade at a higher value than conventional grain does, because it's harder to do from some respects, but it's also harder to do because our system is creating a more difficult environment to literally do nothing to your land. So it's, I get on my soapbox about this often where, you have to jump through all these hoops. You have to do all this paperwork. You have to follow all these rules to prove that you're doing nothing to your crop. Meanwhile, you can, use nitrogen-based inputs. You can, use spray down techniques. You can use all sorts of things on your land to increase your crop yields and and protect your crop from pests and molds and things like that, and you don't have to really necessarily disclose it to anybody, so it's the system's a little backwards to me from our perspective, but I'm of the mindset, and a lot of our customers and the customers that we would like to work with and partner with are in this mindset of wanting the cleanest products possible, and also know that our farming base is putting nutrients back in the soil, increasing soil health, sustainable farming practices, to ensure that we're going to get these unique varieties of grain, but also consistent crop quality year after year after year. And the more they do it, the more consistent it's going to get.
So it's about doing the right thing, and the cleaner product will come from organic wheat.
We think so, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it an argument that one tastes better than the other? Because I think, if I'm paying for something specifically, like I will pay for the more expensive one, organic or not, but can we taste the difference? Because I think that's what would matter for me personally.
That's another very difficult question to answer. And, I want to say yes, but there's a lot of things that go into that answer yes. And I will say yes, it does. And it comes down to a combination of things that happen throughout the product's life cycle. The wheat itself has potential to have a bit more flavor to it, just because the varieties have not been crossbred for other attributes that work better in the market, i.e., crop yield, a pigment, kernel size, things like this that, wheat breeding programs tend to try to maximize the potential of some areas of the wheat kernel, where the organic crops, the crossbreeding is done, but most of the time crossbreeding is done for flavor, to preserve a certain nutritional attribute of that kernel of grain. So theoretically, yes, the organic grain should taste better, but it doesn't stop at the kernel. I mean, it's in the farmer's hand, how they're treating the soil, the nutrients that they're putting into the ground that those grains are going to absorb during the beginning of their new life cycle. And then once that's harvested and in the bins and on its way to the mill, it's how it's milled is the other thing, because there's definitely, a lot of what's the right word to use?
Variance?
Yeah, variance, and thank you very much. Thanks. In flavor, depending on how the product is milled. If we're talking stone milling, short flow milling, slow, cool roller mill versus a large, long flow, just a chugging away, producing as much as possible, maximizing extraction. So there's an area of organic milling that exists in the smaller artisan circles, where you have these smaller, older mills that are grinding flour in an older way, and it might just be that they're incurring less heat stress during the milling process. It could be that they're not milling as quote unquote clean white flour. So you have a little bit more germ and bran that's present in the flour that's adding to its flavor and sweetness. So I mean, looking at all those components, just in the milling is like mind-boggling enough, but coupling that together with the attention to the varieties and all that, so it's a whole string of things that potentially, and most of the time, does yield a different tasting product. Taste is very subjective. It might not always be sweeter. It might be a little bit more robust. It might be a little greater amount in tannins. It might be a little of this or a little that. Depending on the variety and what you're looking for. But
it almost seems like you have to have a trained eye for that, to be able to see the subtleties. Would you say that the average consumer would be able to see right away, or like, is it super obvious?
Not necessarily. When it gets into extremes, it is, for sure, because you see pigment value change in the endosperm of the kernel. And, sometimes we have a variety of flour that's very yellow in color, a variety of wheat flour. There's some obvious ones that are very yellow, like durum or corazon, but like just a traditional wheat flour can have a lot of pigment to it. And that's kind of off-putting for a customer that's used to using, a very white product. And then they look at it, it's a very yellow, and then they throw it in the mixing bowl and hydrate it, and then it becomes a whole nother level of yellow, which is pretty unique, So that type of thing, maybe it makes the person that's mixing just ask a few more questions, like, is this right? And of course it is right. It's just different, and it's unique, and it's something to kind of lean into.
What would you say to the person? Because I've heard this from a couple of folks, and I think when it comes down to organics, it becomes more inconsistent. Is that because you're at will to the environment and I don't know. What do you say to people who say organic flour isn't consistent enough for me? Do you hear that?
We do for sure. It's very legitimate statement that we do hear often, not super often, but we do hear it. And it mainly comes down to the fact that there's just not as much organic wheat being grown as conventional wheat. It's kind of where I think you draw the line. It's slimmer pickings. Yes. Yeah. Where commercial plots of land, or traditionally more commercial farmers, are growing much larger. They have a much larger acreage at their fingertips, obviously the nitrogen inputs will help them yield more, consistent protein and things like that. But I think it just comes down to size. It's just a lot more of a particular, let's say, protein level of grain being grown. Say it's a hard red winter wheat, 12.5 protein. There's just way more of that on the commercial market than there is in the organic market. And the organic guys and gals that are growing it in much smaller plots in much diverse areas, just scattered around so much more. So we all have the same environmental issues for sure. We're all dealing with the same, changing patterns in rainfall and heat and things like that. So it's that the conventional farmer has to deal with that as well. So those things affect both crops, organic and conventional, for sure. But the scale of the organics is at a much smaller size. So the mills that are milling this flour tend to have to deal with, say, 40 farmers growing a 12.5 winter wheat versus one or two farmers or an elevator that's supplying a very homogenized cut of 12.5 winter wheat. So when you look at it in that respect, yes, commercial flour definitely tends to be more consistent crop year to crop year because of that, and lot to lot, versus organic, where organic mills have to work so much harder to make that grain consistent. But there's technology out there that's really helping our mill and other mills, achieve a more consistent result with all these different varieties of grain and plots of land and regions that we're having to pull from.
Let's talk about pan pizzas for a quick second. What are you using to press out your dough? I found out that whatever fat you use greatly affects the flavor of your pizza. And that is why the only brand I trust with my pizza is Corto olive oil. Taste is everything, and other brands and other fats pale in comparison. Do you want to taste the difference? Go to corto-olive.com using the link in the show notes. You can purchase a bottle there, or if you're an operator, you can get a free tasting. Just message me and I'll connect you with them. I'll leave my contact in the show notes. Thank you, Corto Olive Oil, for sponsoring the podcast. If this organic farmer sends you a bunch of wheat and I guess you use your technology and it's not 12.5, I would say, would you say, you think it could come out to 12.4, 12.3 in terms?
That doesn't make too much of a difference to us. No.
But what would the inconsistencies be, and what would you do to remedy that?
We'll blend. A lot of blending, a lot of blending. Yeah, yeah. So instead of like a 2 or 3 cocktail blend of wheat going into the mill, it could be, 4 or 5, where you have, a few different protein levels of winter wheat. And within those protein levels, you have different characteristics, mixing tolerances, incorporation times, and things like that. And then to help control protein, you add a little bit of spring wheat to it as well. Or if it's a real strong flour, it's all spring wheat with a winter wheat as a control. Or you really get into this cocktail mode, where you become a mixologist of sorts, to like make all these varieties dance together in a way.
I find that fascinating.
It really is. And to see it work in the lab is like mind boggling. We have this, this machine is called the dough lab, and every year we're actually going through this cycle right now, with all our new crop wheat, where we're checking in and analyzing all the crop quality across all our growing regions. And one guy we have on staff, Adam Waters, he's got the patience of a saint. He sits there and analyzes every single variety of grain that comes in. We catalog it in this big long spreadsheet. And so we're just building. We'll have, 100 plus. I think this year we'll be around 160 or so different varieties of grain, different levels. And we can go through and make what we call theoretical blends of these things. So we can pick these
two go together, and this will add this and this will add that, and it kind of makes the final product that you think will work in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it creates a lab document that we look at, and has all the properties that we're looking for in it. And if it's not there, we can tweak the blend a little bit, and then from there we'll take that and make a physical sample from that grain, make a blend, make the flour, and then test it again against the theoretical blend, and then just to validate it, and then we go to production.
Oh, okay. So it's just like I don't want to simplify it or like make it smaller than it is, but it's just a 2-step process, and then it's production.
Essentially, it's a 2-step process that has a lot of little steps that go into it. But yeah, it's essentially that. Yeah, and before we had this piece of equipment, this big technology, I mean, it would all be by feel, by like intuition. And Adam and Zach Perry, our 2 main lab guys, they are just like so good with grain. They just understand the kernel of wheat so well and how to blend and mix. And it's really cool.
It's a really cool skill. Bringing this to the pizza maker level, like I've heard of like, oh, you have to touch the dough because of like the variance in the wheat, right? You have to be able to have that baker's touch. Sometimes you might have to add more water or less water depending on the harvest that year, whatever comes to your door in the bags. Is there a way for people to learn that without? Is there technology that people can have at their house? Is there something that they can look up? Is it a certificate of analysis?
Oh yeah. There's a certificate of analysis that gives you the data of the flour that's inside that bag. But again, this is the data of that flour inside that bag at the time we tested it. So if you're using a type of flour that the data is representing 6 months later in New Orleans,
it's gone through some changes.
A lot of changes. The elevation, everything, so like the data isn't exactly what it says in the sheet. But how you use this thing is that you have that document, use one lot of that flour, and theoretically, if you're in that same kind of process, maybe getting the flour through distribution and they're ordering on a regular cadence. So if, it might be 6 months old, but it might always be 6 months old. You know what I mean? So your next batch was made a little bit later. So you have a benchmark of the document. It's like, okay, it might say it's 63% absorption, has an incorporation time of this, incorporation time of that. And that's what it is at the time that we tested it. But when you're using it in this context in New Orleans, 6 months later after it's been milled and tested in a dry, high environment, you're going to make some changes to it. And So the next lot might be 62% absorption. So you're just dropping maybe a percent and change in your hydration. The one after that, it might be 64%. So you need to make that adjustment as well. But it's not relative to the number on the paper. It's relative to your environment, where you're at, the humidity levels you're at, the mixers you have in your bakery, all those little things. Your mixing technique even sways these things. So these are all things that affect commercial flour as well as organic flour. They're kind of the same. We just make the data a bit more available for people to learn and figure this out on themselves.
If someone has a bag of central milling, and I admittedly have not looked up any sort of COA prior to this conversation, where does one look to find that information? And is there a tutorial for them to be able to read it? Because when you say absorption, I still don't even think I understand that.
What's this weird word mean? There's a lot of words on the COA documents that are kind of like, what the heck? Yes, we do have a resource for it. It's centralmilling.com/COA for certificate of analysis. And then you navigate to that page and you enter in the lot number that's stamped on the bottom of the bag, and start entering the product name. Say it's the lot number, it's a 6-digit code, and it's like I say, it's organic, type 00 normal. You enter that in there, and then up comes the COA for that document. So it's super easy to access, which is through especially for pizzerias and pizzeria operators that are looking for this type of data. It's really difficult to get this type of stuff because they're buying their products through layers of distribution. Maybe it's one layer, maybe it's 2 layers of distribution,
like a food, like a truck, and then like a distributor.
Yeah.
And then whoever's the parent company of that. Is that what you're saying in terms of layers?
Yeah. So say you're an operator and you're like, you're ordering your flour from, like, say, Chef's Warehouse, and Chef's Warehouse is buying it directly from the mill. So you have, one layer in there, but you as the operator, you don't have a direct line to the mill necessarily. And I'm not saying just our mill, just any mill. So your first phone call is going to be to the your sales rep at Chef's Warehouse or Buy Right or whatever.
And they got their hands on everything, so it's like we can't expect them to be like
chasing down the numbers for you, but they may have that data. I don't know, but it's easier to. I guess it's to know that you can come to like a resource like ours, and hopefully maybe other mills will adopt this type of technology too to make these things available. So we're not the only ones doing it. Of course, we'd love to help everybody out and say come to us for it, but that's not necessarily the case. We don't understand the realities of procurement. If you're in, say, Portland, Maine, it's really difficult to get our flour there. So there might be other mills that have it, but finding the numbers from other areas is just hard. But so the data is a little difficult to get. It can be, through our site. We try to make it as easy as possible. The one thing we do not have is a very clear tutorial on how to read these documents. And that's something I'd like to work on. The problem is it's such an intense thing to teach, and really, it seems easy, understanding what the terminology means, but what does it mean in context of this document? That's where it becomes a little difficult. And I try to steer people into just look and observe what's happening in their bakery. Understand a few of the concepts, like absorption, for example, and how quickly the proteins of the wheat are absorbing the water so they can begin to develop gluten. Like understanding terms like that at a base level, and then once you understand that, getting into just watching your dough, paying attention to it, becoming the artisan you are. Because flour is a living thing, especially when you're talking about organics. It's going to change a little bit. You need to work with it. It's like wood. Like if you're a woodworker, the humidity levels are going to be a little different in your workshop, every time. So maybe you have to use a plane a little bit differently, or set the settings on your machines a little bit different. I don't know that much about woodworking, but I would imagine. I'm trying to draw a line. Much empty here. I guess the point is, to use Tony Gemignani's line, is to respect the craft, and to get back to that artisan perspective of dealing with your dough and getting to know it, and just know that's going to be different every day. And there's a lot of operators out there that kind of preach in the choir too, that they understand this very well. But there's a lot of people that come into this business and just expect it to be identical every time, and it's impossible for it to be. I mean, the weather changes, summer to winter, and a rainy day to a hot dry day. It's like all those little things are going to create variance in your dough. And really, there's two extremely simple things I ask people just to pay attention to. Is that it's just your hydration and the temperature of your dough. You pay attention to those two things. I mean, there's other things that you can pay attention to and drill into, but just those two things from the baseline will get you so far.
What are you looking for when hydration? Let's talk about that, because when I first started making pizza, I was like, get your hydration as high as possible so you can make that nice plump airy crust and blah blah blah. But like, some flour shouldn't be going over X amount of hydration, right? So, or could you argue that? Is that, or are you saying you could?
I think you can. Yeah. You could. You can push limits in every corner of life, and dough is no exception.
Okay, but let's say, like, if finding the right hydration for the flour that I have in front of me, what should I be looking for?
Well, the first question you got to ask yourself: what is the right hydration for you? What does this mean? There's other factors that come along with it, and it's more of getting to what you are seeing in the finished product. Are you looking for a crispy pizza? And if so, okay, you want to hydrate it a little bit less, because the more water you have in that dough, the longer you have to bake it out. You have to bake that water out in order to make a crispy product. Then you have to look at your oven. Can your oven do that? And of course ovens can, but is your oven, like, say your oven, you're working in a place that you're cutting your teeth as an artisan pizzaiolo, and the owner of the shop doesn't want you to touch the oven, and you're like experimenting on the side, and that oven might not be in a setting that will allow you to get what you want if you have too much water in it. So if you adjust your hydration, you can work with the bake temperatures that you're given. So there's
You can't put super wet dough in a 900 degree oven.
And expect you to have a crispy pizza.
Right, because you're going to burn something before you evaporate all that water out.
Exactly, yeah. And you can go back to the flour itself, and there is breaking points in hydration of flour for sure. There's certain varieties of wheat that will just not absorb as much as you want them to absorb.
When you say breaking point, it'll get to a max hydration, and then the minute you put a little bit more water in there, it's just going to stay water. Is that what?
Well, it can release water in the bowl, or just not drink it. You just might have soup. I think a lot of us, and maybe a lot of people that are listening to, or just like have been in this situation. Yeah, that's just a touch too.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can mix it out to get to that, or give it a series of folds to get it. But then if your quality of wheat isn't there, it's going to release water during your bulk fermentation or somewhere else down the line. So it might not be able to hold the water. It might drink it.
It's going to throw it back up.
But it's going to throw it up. Yeah. It's totally possible. Yeah.
One of the things pizza makers spend the most money on is cheese. Every time I have a catering event, cheese is my biggest ingredient cost. But what if I told you there's a cheese company out there that lets you earn cash back for every pound of cheese purchased? I'm talking about Bacio cheese. And their Gold Club Rewards members receive their rewards card every month that can be used wherever Visa is accepted. So the more cheese you buy, the more you can earn. Literally, you get paid to use Bacio cheese. Now that is cool. Learn more at Bacio Cheese using the link in the show notes. Why hasn't Tony Gimignani gone organic yet? And maybe, do you know, is there a reason? Does he want that consistency? Have you tried having the conversation with him?
Oh, yeah. We poke him a lot about it. But really what it comes down to is, most pizzerias out there operate in a certain economic state where organic flour just doesn't make a lot of sense for them. to boil it down to the truth of it, as much as I hate to admit that, it's the reality of the situation.
It's like a $50 to $60 pound. It's a $50 to $60 bag of flour versus a 30.
It can be, yeah, it can be, depending on how you're getting it, but it's typically, or it can be twice as expensive. And there's some variance in there. Sometimes it's way more than twice as expensive. Sometimes it's, maybe like 30% more. It depends on where you're at, how you're buying it, and that sort of thing. But to make sense of it, like say you're, I don't know, I'm just choosing Akron, Ohio. You're there, and maybe there's not a huge organic market there. So the customer base doesn't see the huge value in buying organics. And I'm totally overgeneralizing here, but
I think it makes
this
sense.
could be a true thing. And then this pizza operator needs to, or bread baker, whoever's making the product and using the flour, has to charge X amount of money just to cover the material costs, which arguably are, not that high when you boil it down. Like the flour costs, I mean, there's sticker shock on the bag of flour, but when you calculate it down to a dough ball, it's pennies, the difference. The pizza operator, it just needs to charge a bit more for it. And plus, a lot of people that are using organic flour are making the full commitment to organics. So a place for an operator, and this is, I think, a lot where Tony's perspective lies, is that, a pizzeria isn't gonna, maybe bare minimum they'll use organic tomato sauce, but then to procure organic cheese and to procure organic herbs and like everything that goes along with it, it's a very costly endeavor, and one that might not be obtainable for wherever you're making pizza. So as far as like the whole package goes, it may not be realistic.
It's not just doubling the cost of your flour or 30% markup on flour. It's a 30% to doubling of all of your food costs, essentially.
Yes, yeah. If you're going full bore into the program. But there's other things you need to keep in mind too. It's like, well, okay, this is my core product. There's, let's at least look what could be, not organic about this non-organic flour. Is it just the fact that they're using a nitrogen-based fertilizer in the grain? Sure. Okay, that's no big deal, because none of that residue is captured on the external of the kernel through the milling process. But if there's any spray down, fumigation,
a litany of other things,
pest control, things like that goes on after the wheat is in its head or in storage and things like that, that residue lives on the wheat. There's not a cleaning process. There's not somebody there cleaning every kernel of grain to make sure these chemicals are off this grain before it goes in to the mill. It's there. So it's at that level, when you think about that, it might be an easier, like, okay, I'll just deal with the organic flour because I know at least that's a clean product. I'm not putting, or potentially exposing my customer base to a chemical, whether it may or may not be in there. The only flour with carcinogen would be bromated flour. Yeah. And that's at the mill level. And mills should not be using that. So there's no reason to. Wheat's so strong in this country. You don't need to be adding that stuff in that. But, sorry, random tangent.
No, it's fair. I mean, there are still pizzerias out there who are still using it. So I think they need to hear this.
And it's just grandfathered in. It's just what they're used to. And it's just so hard to change that mindset. But most people won't. But it's good to at least educate me, like, no, let people know that there isn't a known carcinogen in your flour that you're using, and it's frankly, illegal in certain states to use it, Sure. But getting back to your question, sorry, I'm really good at going off in tangents.
Me too. Tony G is, I think what you explained helped, but if you have anything else to add, what would that be?
I think that's the core of it. It's more of like, if you're gonna, Tony, especially Tony, he's an all-in type of guy. Once he leans into something, he's all in. So if he was gonna go organic, he would be, like the whole program, that sort of thing. So I think it's just more in his ethos, his philosophy is, making great pizza accessible to all, in all styles. I mean, it's just his these aren't his words, but it's my perception of his mantra to spread the love of pizza at all levels. And this is kind of the most accessible way of doing it for him, with his name on the bag.
And I mentioned Tony Gemignani because this is a person who you've partnered with to essentially create a custom blend of flour for his restaurants, all of them, right? And it's something that one thing I've heard you say in one of your central milling videos is it starts with the baker. What is their vision? What are they looking to create? We then work directly with our farmers to grow the grain to meet the baker's vision.
Yeah. Sounds like something I'd say.
And so you spoke with Tony, you created something for him, and I'm guessing you do that with other people too. Maybe not on like a Tony Gemignani level, but even on smaller scales. Yeah, right.
Sure. Yeah. He came to us with a vision. It's like, I need a very universal flour, a flour that I can use in different ways in my restaurants and help other people in their restaurants, achieve multiple styles from a single type of flour, a single flour source. And, just based on technique. So you start off with a very robust tool that's flexible in so many ways, strength, extensibility, all this stuff, everything, and make it very consistent. And then couple that with a process that allow you to make all these different styles, and then you got a winning combination that's perfect for his for his style and what he teaches and what he promotes, and it's incredible. And then so he had a vision, and then we came up with a product, a blend of wheat, and in order to make that happen. But we do it, for bread, bread bakers as well, artisan bread bakers who are looking for a certain crumb color or, some sort of certain flavor profile, even tortilla manufacturers as well, like looking for a certain color profile in a finished tortilla, try to work with different varieties of wheat, different milling techniques to achieve these different things, and in the name of, helping that baker, see that vision in real life, have a tangible version of what they see,
Yeah. And so like just sort of I like where we're at, especially about the vision part. How do people begin with that, right? Because I think in order to come to you and have that conversation, should they already have an idea of a vision?
Yeah, and we can help. I can help talk about it, because I get all fired up talking about, people's visions with people, because I love seeing dreams come to reality, my own, but also everybody else's. Is just so much fun, especially in this space. It's it's like, okay, it might just be a texture that you have a dream of, a texture, and maybe like a color in the finished product, and you're just, okay, you call me up and say, hey, this is what I'm dreaming of, this is what I want to make. And it's like, okay, try this, send them or her the product and give it a go. Okay, this was great, but it didn't have this or this or this. It's like, okay, now do this, and this, so we can like help manipulate it. And maybe if it's a smaller operator, then, the realities of making a custom blend might not be there, to meet quantities that we need to produce to make it, and so on.
But even at that point, you can tell them to just grab this bag of flour,
Yeah, and blend it.
Mix it yourself.
Yeah, blend it yourself. So at the most basic level, that's like where you can start. But if there's like a pizza factory, somebody that's, pumping out, shells, over and over and over again, and they have a vision, it's like, okay, we can make this, and then turn it into a blend and this cocktail. And it might have just maybe a cocktail of varieties of wheat in it, maybe some dough improvers if that's needed, and that sort of thing. But it also could be a mixture of different grains altogether. It might be a wheat flour, but also mixed with, you mentioned Corazon earlier. It could be rye, it could be spelt, or it could be millet, it could be whatever. The sky's the limit. We can make a custom blend, put it in a bag for that pizza factory, conventional type of operator to make a product.
Is there you had mentioned earlier that your lab people have like this database of all the different things, and they're able to grab this and this and mix it together. Is there a easy cheat sheet for us at home to be like, if I add Corazon, it's gonna do this? No. Is it too hard to?
It's a trial and error. You just got to
I
give
knew
it
the
a go.
shortcut. No, I'm just kidding.
No shortcuts. No, there's no shortcuts in this business. There's some
I
things
wish
that
there.
are.
I wanted to disagree with that so much, but as I've been in this for like 5 years, it's just you gotta just do it, do the work. Yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
Just that. Do the work. Do your homework and try it out, because you're going to learn something on the way. And the coolest thing I think is like you might stumble onto some sort of realization, something that you weren't even looking for. It's like some side effect of something you were experimenting with that might lead you down a completely different path. And your vision might change, your dream might change because of that. So it's like, why not experiment with this stuff? It's like, it's in your best interest to really, yeah. Happy mistakes. What was that? I should know this. There's a chef that happy little mistake. No, it was Bob Ross, the painter. Oh, yeah. Duh, of course. It's a happy little mistake, when he's painting, it's like he wouldn't have known that was a mistake, or like come up with this cool tree with a 3-inch, house painting brush if he didn't try it, it's like, yeah, give it a go, see what happens.
Yeah. Worst comes to worst, you just, you still have a delicious piece of bread. It just might not be your thing, but you find that magical thing eventually, and you're just like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever put in my mouth.
And it's really not that expensive to do. Yeah. And a lot of people will say, oh, I gotta buy this bag of flour. It's like, it's really like, how much does your dream cost?
Yeah, I looked at your 5-pound bags over there. The ancient grains seem to be like the most expensive, but even that, it's like $20
maximum. Yeah, for a 5-pound bag. Yeah, like that's the top. Einkorn, the most expensive.
You can make a lot of dough batches with 5 pounds, and especially because you're just incorporating a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah. Unless you're going full bore with it.
Can you do that?
Oh yeah, it's a pain in the ass. With Einkorn, it's so difficult to work with, but you can, like, once you figure it out, it's it's like anything. The first time you do it, it might be difficult, but man, after you do it over and over and over again, it's like, you figure out little ways to do it. And it's like, instead of using flour on your bench, when you're making your dough balls, you might use water. You find like different ways of changing your process and your technique to play into the style.
Okay.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it does. And so I guess going back to the vision part, for the operator who isn't Tony Gimignani or has a factory, like, where do they start? Is it just, let me buy a bag of Artisan Baker's Craft and just like play around with that and see what I like, see what I don't like? Is it researching a little bit and doing a little bit of that homework to see what?
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple things. One, just get your hands dirty, start doing something. Do something, follow Nike's mantra, just do it, do something. But understand some of the fundamentals of what's going on with what you're doing. It's kind of like, and I've used this, and I haven't used it for a few years, so it's not quite tired in my head yet, but the analogy of Picasso in this situation, it's like when Picasso began, he understood figure drawing very well. The curves of the body, the essence of form, the rules of light, and how it affects a subject in order to replicate that on a canvas, right? And then once he understood all that, he started breaking all those rules, right? Like to the extreme, and then you wind up with, extreme cubism on one end, and it's just like, but you had to understand all these other things at the beginning before you can start breaking the rules. You got to know what rules to break, and I think that same thing holds so true with baking is, it's like, understand the fundamentals, the basic cause and effect. If I do this, this will happen. Once you get that, just plug in ingredient.
And I know people can just mix a bunch of flour and water at their house, but you also have the Artisan Baking Center here where you kind of get into the nitty gritty of that, would you say?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's here. Yeah. You can. Yeah. We do have classes here. I mean, there's classes that, a lot of other in local areas that will you can educate. And I mean, at the bare minimum, just go talk to your local pizzeria or your local bread baker and just say, hey, look, I really want to learn what's going on here. It might be 10 minutes of their time to like give you a couple, tips, but it also could result into a stage in their place, and it also could result into employment, and then learning on the job. But just education is huge too, to go to places and learn as much as you can from as many people as you can. Tony's school here, King Arthur has a great set of baking programs, and don't just learn pizza too, learn bread, because after all, pizza is flat bread, and there's so much you can apply from the artisan baking space to pizza. And vice versa. It's like bread bakers can learn a lot from pizzaiolas as well. I think it's a great two-way street.
Interesting. I'm glad you said that, because you sort of teed me up for where I want to end this conversation. Is Peter Reinhardt had interviewed you 4 years ago, and he said the artisan bread movement was farther ahead than pizza, and they and when I think back at it, like, they were one of the first people to use electric ovens. They were incorporating ancient grains. And so would you say that sentiment is still true today? The artisan bakers movement is a little bit ahead of pizza, and they're doing things that pizza makers aren't doing.
Yeah, but I wouldn't use the word ahead. They're just in a different headspace. It's just a different perspective. Excuse me. It's like they're just exposure. There's more tools, and by tools I mean ingredients, being talked about in the artisan baking space when it's applied to dough, and that's just convention. And artisan bread is baked all over the world with all sorts of different varieties of grain, and so there's a lot of inspiration to pull from. But in pizza, it's traditionally, white flour hydrated to a specific range, and then a fairly limited amount of process notes to go along with it. Everybody's kind of doing the same thing. That's true like 10, 15 years ago. You're like walking the aisles of the International Pizza Expo. It was very, I don't want to say monoculture when it came to pizza, but it was definitely a little bit more basic. Everybody's kind of doing roughly the same thing, with slight tweaks, slight different varieties of flour and things like that. But now you go, and there's people doing all sorts of crazy stuff with flour, different. Well, just incorporating more whole grains pizza, and you have the extreme guys that are, folks that are just doing, like super long fermentation, trying to push, like 5 days of fermentation to get like a lot of, sourdough flavors that are traditionally from the artisan baking world into their pizza. And, on the other side, you have people that are trying to like shorten up the process, so so they're looking to artisan bakers like, well, how do you achieve these things in these periods of time? And how do I apply that to my pizza making process? And I think, the conversation is growing between the two groups, and eventually, and I see it in a lot of different areas of the country, is that they're becoming one. It's like some pizzaiolas know just as much as a lot of the artisan bakers that I know of, and vice versa. There's some pizza guys I know that know way more than artisan bakers that I talk to. So it's like, it's really cool to see how this conversation has progressed and the knowledge that's being shared, and just by talking amongst each other and having like the International Pizza Expo as a stage has been incredible for that.
That's really cool. I want to go to, is it IBIE?
IBIE?
IBIE. I want to go to that next.
That's a big show.
Yeah.
That's a big show. That's a fun show. It's one of the larger ones, if not the largest in America, but there's some other international ones that kind of make that show look small.
Really?
Oh yeah. But here it's a fun thing to go see, because you're wowed by machines. I mean, you get to see, there's not many times that a normal person in the bakery industry can walk up to a 3,000-pound dough horizontal mixer. Be like, okay, this is just one batch, and it puts it out in about 6 minutes. It's incredible. Like to see that type of stuff, and like all the cooling technology, the spiral coolers, and all the tools that are available that more and more equipment manufacturers are making for smaller scale operations too. It's really neat to see that stuff. I think as far as innovation and flavor and tasting, and like to see what people are doing, interesting with finished products like the Pizza Expo or some of these other smaller regional shows, I think tend to expose a bit more of that expertise. But the IBIE show is just fun to see all that. And there's small pockets of stuff. We have our little corner that we do like some weird, crazy stuff in. But
IBIE is the International
Baking Industry Expo.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I do like to go to these expos for food, to eat the food and sample the food. But I mean, if I do just a little bit less eating at that one, I'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful part about it is that the food stops, there's big gaps between them because the show's so big. You'll have like a sample here of something awesome, and then you have to walk like 4 blocks past all this equipment, this thing, that thing, this thing, to get to the next sample. So it's not like the pizza show where it's like, boom,
oh goodness.
Boom, boom, boom. So you have a little bit more walking
Get
to do.
Some steps in. All right. Hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot here, but who in pizza is doing something like super interesting with wheat or their finished product that you know of? Could be, and maybe just to like kind of tip you off a bit or like get you a head start. Maybe they're using sprouted grains, or they're using ancient grains, or they're using a ton of whole wheat. Like who's doing things that are like out of the box, not basic, opposite of basic?
Let's see here. There's so many. Let's see. So I'll go where my heart's at with the smaller operators. Got guys that are like from the artisan baking world that make pizza, like as a part of their program. Maybe it's a Wednesday night thing that they do at their bakery, or it's a supplement, a farmer's market or something. And the first person that comes to my mind is my good buddy Mike Zakowski, whose operation is called The Baker. He's out in Sonoma, bakes for the farmers markets. He's always done incredible fun stuff to me, from my perspective, with pizza, and mainly whole grain doughs, always naturally leavened, cold bulk fermentation, that sort of thing. And I mean, so you can eat 2 or 3 of his pizzas and it's just like, I'm full, but I'm not like, feeling gorged, but the flavor profiles, he puts that artisan baking expertise and all his years of baking and flavor development into this humble pizza. And he's always been inspiring to me for that. We have on the big side of things, because you did mention sprouted, but I was thinking this anyway, Damascus Bakery. They're in New Jersey, and this is a big pizza operation. I mean, they make shells for other people type of thing. Their bakery is huge, and so beautiful, and it's like an equipment lover's dream to go into this place and to see it operate. It's just so cool. But he's using sprouted grain. They're using sprouted grain in their crust, and they make a very unique flavor. And their whole mindset is like, okay, I'm going to take a survey. What is everybody else doing? I'm going to do not that, And he comes up with, and their team come up with some very unique flavor profiles for mass-produced cool product. And they have a line called Brooklyn Bread, BRED, because that's kind of their home, their heart, where they're from, and a line of flatbreads that are made with sprouted grain, using a lot of amount of pre-ferments in their finished product, and it just tastes fantastic for a mass-produced product where most people would just kind of scoff at it, but it's really good. So that's really inspiring to see those type of ingredients being used at a large scale. I mean, it's funny. Like every time I go visit a bakery, not every time, but most times, especially this time of year, I see the sandwich board sign kicked out in front. Pizza night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and they're taking some of their artisan bread dough and just treating it a different way and making pizza out of it. So you get to expose the average, or could be their average customer, and kind of blow their mind with different flavor profile of their pizza. It's like they take a bite out of it, and it's like maybe they don't even make the association. Oh, this tastes like your famous Levain bread that we buy all the time, but it could be that same exact dough. It's just like putting it in a different context and gaining, shaking up the beliefs of that customer. It's like, okay, this pizza doesn't need to be a white flat vehicle to get this topping in my mouth. It could be in a perfect balance with the toppings that I'm using. And I see that more and more, and that's super inspiring. Everybody that's doing that is fantastic around. So it's just really cool to see.
Thank you for sharing that. Is making my mouth water just hearing it. Like I'm ready to try those places and have this flavor explosion in my mouth. So thank you for putting me on.
Find your local artisan baker and see if they're going to be doing their pizza nights, and hopefully they're applying that type of mentality to it. But it's like, support your local baker. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Nicky, you've been very generous with your time, and I like to wrap this up. You do? I only have you for an hour. No, you. So two things. I want. One. What do you want to leave the audience with, if anything?
Oh,
loaded question.
Like it's the basic is don't stop following your dreams. It's like you have a vision for what you want in dough. Chase it. Don't ever let go. Don't ever stop playing and manipulating and having fun with it. It's like, just when you think you're feeling a little complacent or as you're bored, like completely bring in a different flour, a different grain, different something, just mix it all up. Just go nuts and just stumble onto something new to keep it fresh, because you got to keep that love and that passion in your work. And I think that's a fun way of doing it.
I thought I had my perfect cocktail because I had accidentally mixed 2 bags of flowers that I got for free. One was the Tony Gimignani flour, and the other one was an El Dorado.
Ooh, you have some of that still?
I got it for free from Al the Pizza Buddha. So that's why I wore his shirt today. And it was about like 6 months old when he gave it to me. I found out from your team it was about like close to a year old now. And I was loving the dough that was coming out. It was actually what I used in my competition.
Awesome.
And
that's a unique grain right there.
And then I found out you all don't have it anymore. And so I got some of the Central Milling whole wheat, played around with it, loved it. And like, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is just going to be my main dough. But after today's conversation, no, it's time to keep playing with it.
Yeah, you do it. Yeah. Mix it up. Nothing lasts forever.
No, for sure.
Nothing lasts forever. You got to be prepared to make some changes. But I'll give you some hints on that El Dorado, though.
Tell me. Oh, maybe off right now? You got time?
If you want. Yeah, sure. I got time.
Tell me.
Okay. So El Dorado, what's really cool about El Dorado is that it's pigment.
Yeah.
It is so yellow.
Yes.
I mean, you look at it, you're like, holy crap, how is it so yellow? That's why I named it El Dorado, city of gold, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so golden. But it's just the natural characteristics of that grain. It just has a high amount of beta carotene in it that makes it very yellow. It almost looks like a Durham flour, and it's very sweet. Naturally, it's very sweet. It's more sweet closer to the mill date, so the year-old one might not be as sweet as it could be, but it's potentially, depending on how it's been stored. But you could swap that out with extra fancy Durham. So if you're hooked on the color of it and the light sweet notes of it, extra fancy Durham like nails that.
When you say extra fancy Durham, is that just Durham that's been milled extra?
It's basically to really dumb it down, it's like the white flour of the Durham kernel. So it's everybody knows semolina. So it's like semolina made super fine.
Okay. Do you all sell that? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So would it be an even swap, or would I just
I'd go 1-to-1. Go
one
for
to
it.
one? All right.
Let's see what happens.
Let's do it.
Let's see what happens.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah, got it.
And then final question for you, as I like to wrap this up in the way that I do. No right or wrong answer.
Oh boy.
What's good dough?
What's good dough? Your dough. The dough that you're making in that moment. That's the one you should stay focused on. That is good dough right there.
Thank you so much for your time, Nicky. I really do appreciate this.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on and asking me fun questions.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it.